Well, welcome to our stand here. As you can see, we've got a lot of equipment here that has to do with fishing. What we've done is we worked with the Youth Service in Rotherham, who run a very successful program where they take kids who have difficulties at school or at home, who are often not communicating with psychologists or care workers or parents or educators, who take them fishing. And in this space in which they, with the local angling club, in which they learn how to fish, they get into a communication, especially with the older fishermen, and that proves to be very, very helpful for them. We wanted to find out what it was that made that fishing space so special, because if we understand that, we can also apply it in different contexts. And we did that not so much by looking at it through the lens of psychology or social science, but by looking at fishing as a meditative, contemplative practice, and also by looking at what the symbolical meaning of fishing has been in our culture, because it goes back a very long time, this idea that fishing has got something to do with well-being. There is a book that was written in 1653 by Isaac Walton, The Compleat Angler, and the subtitle of that book is The Contemplative Man's Recreation. So Walton in the 17th century already knew that fishing is a meditative thing, that the combination of skill and waiting, being patient, and then when the fish bites, you never know when that's going to be, being able to act, that has a very positive effect on our sense of agency, on how we behave ourselves in the world. And that is what we wanted to find a language in our own day to articulate that. And that's basically what we've done. Okay.
Marcus, what's your involvement in the project? What are you doing?
In terms of the project, it's often found that young people, particularly boys, don't do particularly well at education and secondary school formats, and perhaps it's not for them. When they're in that particular environment, they may struggle, they may kick off, they may get angry, they may get excluded. They have no way to share their skills, to develop their masculinity, to a status amongst their peers, wider society, families, parents, carers. Fishing has been found to be a place where young boys can have pride in their developments, they can learn from older men in the community, they can share their skills to other young people who too might have gone through a very difficult situation. It's a sense of masculinity which grows, which is healthy, rather than looking at other forms of youth culture, perhaps, where they may adopt the gangster culture, the street culture, use the streets as an activity to find their masculinity, to find their place in society, which can be very problematic for all, especially for a young person. To gain pride, to gain strength and courage to share your skills is fantastic. It's also a bit deeper than that. It's a pun. When a young person or an individual relaxes, contemplates through the waters, they make an offering. They can make an offering of, could be corn, it could be a worm. It's kind of an ancient practice to give something of yourself for a gift to the waters, to an unknown future or an unknown event, a gift, a present. It could be a fish, a silverfish, a goldfish. Often when you do that, you put a bit of yourself in there in a very safe way. And occasionally you'll see a young person relax to such a degree that you'll see a smile upon their face or a glimmer, that kernel, that life can be better. That magical thing which is often so very rare in those particular young people's lives exists. And from my perspective, it's just enabling people to recognise that part. What was it about that fishing experience? What happens? And when you get angry or you get upset, think upon that and use that special kernel of growth to develop for the rest of your personality, to believe in yourself and to grow with you.
And presumably part of the trigger for all of this must be that if you're talking to kids who are in an urban environment, then generally speaking, the act of fishing is taking place in even if in a microcosm, a rural environment with lots of water and trees. So it's getting them out of their natural environment, if you will, so that they've got the opportunity to contemplate.
There's a lot to be said about that. If you think about how youth work itself began, where families, young people went from the farming lands, the open lands, straight into large cities, industrialisation. Boys got bored. They got riotous. They became problematic. So a lot of organisations started up youth clubs and things like that to occupy the boys who weren't used to that environment. Personally, I like to educate young people, particularly boys, in mixed environments, outside, inside, outside education, under trees, taking positive, safe risks. But again, back to fishing. It's not just about boys, it's about girls, it's about breaking down barriers. Girls actually involved in the project too often have very, very similar experiences and almost buy into it and get proud of it and have a competition with the boys and get the most fish. But I think there's a block due to sexism or conditioning by girls that want to go fishing, and it's some colleagues of mine have actually taken up fishing, who has to be happy female, because they understand it, and the permission to do so is to hold the rods. Once you've held that rod, it gives you permission to enter that almost charged magical space or transformation where you can be, where you can open up entirely and take risks with yourself and close back. And if you don't get a fish, it's not your fault. It's the fish, it's the wind. If you do get a fish, gosh, you're amazing.
Yeah, again, you're talking about a subject. I live on a house which sits right on the side of a 5-acre lake, and it's part of 192 acres, and we get families coming along, as well as professional fishermen. And one of the most common things I found, and maybe you can speak to this in the context of your project, is when we walk around those lakes, fishermen never talk to us, and we'll walk around and we'll say good morning to them. Complete silence. And in actual fact, there was one occasion where I had to move some logs from point A to point B, and the fishermen moved their kit between places using wheelbarrows. And so I had to get some logs, so I went to get a wheelbarrow, and I was going along with a wheelbarrow, nothing in it, past the same fishermen. And they started talking to me, because I had some aspect of their world, and they presumably thought I was a fisherman now. I was in their club. And it's an interesting aspect that you're trying to get people to connect and communicate more, and yet the view from the outside is that fishermen tend to be very insular and not communicative. Do you have any views on that?
Yes, of course. This is one of the most interesting parts. First of all, it's a culture, so when you're not part, like in your experience, when you're not part of it, they don't talk to you. But also, fishing is largely about being quiet. There's a real reason for that. If you're not quiet, the fish won't come. But of course, as everything, this fishing is like the water, like the surface of the water is a mirror. The fishing activity is a mirror for something else. That's how we looked at it. And I think the experience of being quiet, quieting down, shutting up, that what you discover is that is the basis of then later being able to speak, being able to act, rediscovering your agency. You have to first become quiet, and that's what this project is about, to discovering how important that really is in our sense of well-being.
So you have a troubled teenager, and you find a way through fishing of calming them down, almost like a reset button, and then you can start to think about building them up. Would that be good?
It's like a spiritual place. I mean, fishing, the sharing of knowledge, the hunter-gathering, it's very, very, very spiritual. I mean, people might find spirituality in many, many ways. I find it to be spiritual. On the grounds, it's contemplative, it's calming. I just say it's wiping or clearing the waters to open yourself up to all that surrounds you without the noise of planes and cars and machines and all those things. It's definitely one's personality and oneself. Because if you're surrounded by noise and agitation, it'll be very, very hard to look in when you're always looking out, to keep yourself alive and safe, especially if you've been through traumatic experiences. Those people build up really quite strong egos and strong pretend selves. In fishing and other similar activities, you can remove that armour and find that you're a very different person than society thinks is. And quite frankly, you're a better person than you thought you could be. And for that, removing all those things, it can enable growth. Almost like planting a seed, put a pot on it, then you remove the armour or the plastic pot, photosynthesis can occur, and green growth from the kernel.
So, how did you manage to choose fishing for this as a particular activity? You mentioned that there were more than one activity of that kind that you could have used. How did you choose fishing?
Well, I think it happened quite serendipitously. It came out of a conference, a Connected Communities conference in Manchester, where Marcus and Kate Powell were talking about this idea of looking at the fishing practices of the youth service in Rotherham, and we're looking for an angle to look at that, to analyse it, as it were, to understand it. I, coming from philosophy, had an interest in a contemporary notion of wisdom and what that might look like in our society, which is constantly changing, and where being old doesn't necessarily mean being experienced anymore. So what do we have a place for a notion of wisdom as a kind of knowing that is not skill, that is not procedure or information, but something else? And we were talking and suddenly realized that by applying this notion of wisdom to the practice of fishing, we might be able to articulate what's so special about it. And at the same time, it's a really good case study to look at what wisdom is as a kind of cognitive function that we have. That's how it came about.
Is there even a notion in this of measurement? Is it a qualitative review, perhaps, that you're doing to say, did it work? I mean, for somebody like me who would listen to what you've said, my first question is, that sounds great. Did it work? And how would you know what working is?
Well, this is of course difficult. Of course, it works, and there's anecdotal evidence when you look at the kids involved in the project, and that's qualitative. You can only do that on an individual basis, as it were. The whole point of discovering a silence that underlies the ability to speak, if I can put it like that, resists a trait in our culture to make everything accessible and available at all times, which causes a lot of grief and stress in people, that everything has to be available all the time. This culture of measurement is, to a certain extent, is an example of that trait in our culture, which we're trying to resist with this project, saying there is something that's very important, but that's not always available. And so in that sense, the question, can you measure it, is skewed. Yes, you can measure it, but actually it is about something that's very important and that cannot be measured. And all of those who say, well, then we don't fund it, or then we don't have a place for it, or then we don't see it, the chickens will come home to roost sooner or later.
Yeah. I was hoping you'd spot there was a rhetorical question.
Can I give an example?
Yeah, sure.
I recently worked for a 24-year-old young man who unfortunately has to spend the rest of his life using and being on methadone. And he's been through many services, many psychologists, lots of interventions. And the one thing he asked me to do for him was to sort him out a fishing license. And we're doing that. And I asked, what was it about fishing now that you want? And he said it's the one place in his memory since a very traumatic childhood that he found peace, solace, and himself. And he could remove all that happened to him, and he could find himself. I think that's really, really appropriate. It's clearly evidential there. Also, the project continues. More and more young people get involved. And if it's only just about attendance and participation and being surrounded by workers, or the opportunity, or the sharing of how to remove a hook from a fish's mouth without blood, which is evident for observation, that's more than enough.
Okay.
And there have been, I think, 400 children have been involved in it already. So that's already quite a sight.
Excellent. So if anybody wants to find out more about your project, how do they contact you?
They can find out about us via the website. They can find a film about the project on YouTube. If you just type in the name of the project, Communicating Wisdom, then that will come up. And the video is also on display here. And that will give you a lot of information, also some addresses, people to contact.
And the website address is communicatingwisdom.com? No?
I'm afraid I have to look that up.
Never mind. Well, I'm sure we'll post it along with the rest of the video. Johan, Marcus, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Sounds like an absolutely fascinating project. Thank you. We'll drop the